What did FOMO meant to you when this came up?
So I invented the word FOMO 20 years ago, last month. You have agency in what you're choosing to do. Why are you choosing to do something? How do you imagine? Why do you want a Porsche? Say it's like I look at you on your Instagram doing all your triathlons and I'm like, wow. Because I do a little bit, I'm like, man, I should do that too. So the thing about FOMO is that when I see you doing your triathlon, I'm like, wow, that looks so amazing. Well, I'm not thinking about all of the sacrifice, all of the injuries, which I know you've had, all of the hours you're getting up early in the morning, all of the expense. I'm just thinking about how cool it is to be in the race or to win or take the Instagram.
How do you sort of now, when you find yourself in a way caught up in this FOMO mindset, how do you get out of it?
And so what we have to do with FOMO is really
Welcome to One at a Time. Today we'll meet Patrick McGinnis, who I've known for quite some time. Amongst other cool things that Patrick has done, he invented the term FOMO in 2004. Since then, he authored 2 books, he's the host of a pretty cool podcast called The FOMO Sapiens, and he also gave a TED Talk called How to Make Faster Decisions, watched by over 1.5 million people. In today's conversations, we've done more than a catch-up with Patrick. We've actually got to challenge some of the perceptions that we've held from our past. I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. And if you do, please don't forget to subscribe and leave your comments below. It means the world. Thank you and welcome. Patrick, we're on. Thank you for having this time with me today.
great to be here.
So, this is a bit of a space for humanity to transpire. And so, as you know, and as we kind of were talking about, there's not necessarily an agenda, but I think, with you, it's sort of very hard not to start off with the fact that you've brought into this planet the concept of FOMO. So, what did FOMO meant to you when this came up?
So I invented the word FOMO 20 years ago, last month. And for me, it's, fear of missing out is what it stands for if you haven't heard of it. It's in the dictionary. You can go look it up. But at the time, for me, it was kind of a commentary on this culture of the business school where I was studying, Harvard Business School, and the fact that nobody... I've always been a very individualistic person. I've always kind of chosen my own pathway. By the way, I'm telling you something I've never said before. This is all, for some reason, it never occurred to me to say it this way, but I'm going to say it to you now. I've always done my own thing. I've always been a real individual, kind of unique person. And that was a place that was pretty conformist. This is the right type of job. This is the right party. This is the right trip. This is the right whatever. And I was very happy to jump into the bandwagon because I really love the place and I love my classmates. And I was like, this is the way to live a better life or whatever. This is the best life. So I did it. I did all the things that I thought were the right things to do. And so did everybody else. And I just thought it was kind of interesting. And I observed that this culture of not wanting to miss out, that the idea that this is the best party and this is the best thing, we've got to go to all these things, was very unusual. And that it wasn't the way I had lived before. So that's why I came up with the term. That's why I wrote about it. I wrote a satirical article in the humor section of our school newspaper. And for me now, all these years later, it really is about, do you have agency in what you're choosing to do? Why are you choosing to do something? How do you imagine your path should be? What is the quote unquote right thing to do? That's what it's all about. That's the root of it all.
You went to the sort of, probably at the time or still now today, if we follow that same logic, probably to the best school that you could go to. And, it just feels like you were also walking that path. How do you sort of now, when you find yourself in a way caught up in this FOMO mindset, how do you get out of it?
So I just went to this full day workshop that was very interesting. It was done by the alumni career services of Harvard Business School. And have you ever heard of the concept of mimetic desire, Juan?
No, but it looks like I'm going to learn something.
Get ready, because it's going to blow your mind. So there is a French philosopher named René Girard, who in the 1980s, I believe, was a professor at Stanford, and wrote about the concept of mimetic desire. And his theory, I'll simplify it because I haven't, this is what I learned in the workshop. His theory is that we are born without any real inherent desires, wishes, wants, why do you want a Porsche? Why do you want summer in the south of France? Why do you want to run a marathon? Whatever, Mm-hmm. And our initial basis of desire is given to us by the people who raise us, our grandparents, our parents, our siblings, whatever, like our immediate. So yeah, if your parents really value, religion, or they really are materialistic, then that'll be imprinted upon you. And that's all inside of you. So that forms your kind of value system or your logic around what you want or desire, or don't want or desire. And then as you get older, you find people who you make your models. Say it's like, I look at you on your Instagram doing all your triathlons, and I'm like, wow. Because I do a little bit. I'm like, man, I should do that too. So it's like Juan becomes my model. I really feel like I should go train and start doing, these triathlons and stuff. I should get a really cool bike and get a gilet from, Rafa or whatever. And then over time, your models become what are called your mimetic rivals. You take the model and you then make it into the measuring stick against which you measure yourself. And so Juan's not just no longer inspiration. He's the person I compare myself to decide if I'm succeeding or not in life. So that's what Girard believes. And I think that is really a lot about FOMO, because FOMO is about seeing what other people are doing and then saying, should I be doing that? And of course, the thing about FOMO is that when I see you doing your triathlon, I'm like, wow, that looks so amazing. Well, I'm not thinking about all of the sacrifice, all of the injuries, which I know you've had, all of the hours you're getting up early in the morning, all of the expense, all of the whatever. I'm just thinking about how cool it is to be in the race or to win or take the Instagram photo. And so what we have to do with FOMO is really think carefully about why we want something, what's the reason, and then is that thing even real? Can you have that thing? Is it even possible? And if so, what is the sacrifice that has to go into it? And as you start to think about those things, then you have a lot better idea of whether you should bother feeling FOMO about it. I think that's how I think about it. Things look great on Instagram, or things look great when you read about them in the paper, but actually doing that thing in real life, that's a much different enterprise.
Did you go to Harvard out of FOMO?
I definitely applied out of FOMO. And then once I got in, I was like, who says no to Harvard? But when I went to visit, I loved it. I fit right in, and I was like, this is the place I was supposed to be. So I had high conviction. I was doing it sort of in a very aligned sort of way.
When you thought of FOMO, when you think about FOMO today, do you feel it also relates to the imposter syndrome that we sometimes have?
So they are related, and I'll tell you how. In my mind, imposter syndrome is informed by our sense of lacking, right? It's like, I've had a bunch of people on my podcast. By the way, just so you know, Juan, in 2023, half of the books that were sent to me for my podcast, because people send me their books, maybe they come on, were about imposter syndrome. Everybody wrote about imposter syndrome. It was the trendy syndrome. That was the FOMO-inducing syndrome. So I learned about a lot about imposter syndrome in 2023. And one of the things I learned is it's something that's deeply connected to our feeling of lack. I don't have this thing, therefore I feel a certain way, right? I think FOMO can be spurred by a sense of lack. If you feel really self-assured and confident and certain on your road that you're taking, you don't really, when you see other people's things, you're not provoked to feel FOMO. If you don't feel that way, say you want a kid and you don't have one, and you see somebody with their kids on social media, then it's a trigger for you. That being said, FOMO can also be a tremendous sense of, it can give us a sense of motivation, and that doesn't necessarily have to come from lack. Wanting to run a marathon isn't a lack thing. It's more about like, wow, that looks cool. Let me do that. And so FOMO, in a positive sense, can just be a source of inspiration.
So maybe there's also, I guess you can take it negative, positive. I guess what I was sort of coming back to, and I'll open up a little bit to you, and this is something that's been sort of in the works of me being able to put some words to it. I remember when I went into the VC industry, something that we also kind of share, I constantly felt I was always the imposter because, wherever room I would go in, everyone would just play that they knew exactly what they were doing and that they knew exactly what the right shots were. And that, in a way, everyone had to take the high road of I know and you don't.
Yeah.
And maybe I was, still too young, and maybe I was still not necessarily confident in what I felt I had done. But I constantly felt that there was something there that was lacking. So, every possibility of somehow trying to prove to others that I knew a little bit more was almost for me a great opportunity to sort of connect to that space of like, okay, maybe if I do that, I'm going to feel that level of confidence that everyone is showing. And sort of when I was talking to you about FOMO before, in a way, I felt that, there might be some connection of how do we try to perceive what others are doing as a way to also get that validation. And for me, it was brutal. I think, it was something that when I look back, I definitely came out of it, out of that space, out of that industry, out of everything, because I just couldn't deal with it anymore within myself. I'm not saying at the time it just felt that it was maybe also somehow forced by external factors, but in reality, it was that I was sort of just trying to pick up on everything that I could to confirm my own bias towards myself, saying, okay, now they know, and my value is 0. Is that something you relate to at all?
It's very interesting you say that. I love that you shared that, because I remember at that time I had been in VC, then I had left, and then I was trying to break back into it. And you had this really great seat. You were working at a place, a great place, at least from the outside it looked that way. And I was like, how do I get his job? Why don't I have a job like that? I have more experience. I should have that job. How come I can't get that job? And I remember, not that I thought you sucked at all. I was like, wow, pretty cool. But I wanted to be in that place. So I felt kind of frustrated. I remember, in fact, the first time I went, there was this, do you remember these conferences, Red Innova?
Yeah.
So my first Red Innova, I went in 2010, I think. I got a ticket given to me by my friends at NXTP Labs. And I went there in Brazil. And I didn't know anybody. I had known everybody in VC in Latin America. I'd done that before business school. I was I knew everybody. And we invested in all the best companies. And I get there, and it's 6 years later, everything's changed. Or 8 years later. All new people, nobody knew who the hell I was. I went to see a panel on VCs. And a couple of VCs spoke, and people were mobbing them at the end. And I was like, I felt so down. I was like, that should have been me. And now I'm a nobody. And so it's just funny how we all have the story that we tell ourselves. And now I look back and I'm like, why did first of all, it was nice. I'm glad I got more involved in the industry and had a really good time. But being in that industry is really hard. And frankly, it's like anything else. It's just an industry, and it takes years to succeed, and it looks really glamorous from the outside. It's not glamorous. But I was just, at that point, I was coming from a deep sense of lack because my career had blown up on Wall Street. I was working for a company that blew up in the 2008 financial crisis. And I just wanted to find the next thing and get my pathway out, my magic ticket. And so to see people who were succeeding in something that I had enjoyed doing before provoked tremendous insecurity in me. So you maybe felt insecure. I was like, Juan's killing it. How do I get some of that?
It's so interesting, right? How our insecurities play. And the problem, I think, is that the more we let our insecurities play, the more insecure we feel. it's just almost self-inflicting. The more we try to run away from something where that's the reference point, the more we bring it up to ourselves. Because I can still remember a birthday of mine surrounded by complete strangers of the industry at an event in Miami, asking myself, why am I even here? I want to cry.
Yeah.
And really not knowing where to run. And I have countless times where I was at VC events that before I would die to get a ticket, just to even just go as a participant, and suddenly I was there, paid to come and talk, and feeling like I needed to hide, somehow feeling that this is not right. Yeah. What are I can imagine that with the life of Wall Street, Harvard, what are still the dreams that you have in front of you that are things that you would still connect to and look up to?
I was just thinking, you just asked the perfect question, because I was thinking, what is the antidote to what you're saying, right? I think for me, what I've realized is, and I think a lot of people eventually realize this, it's just that I did it earlier, is like, I'm not interested in playing on somebody else's field. Like, I don't want to be, I'd rather build my own stadium, as it were. I'm going to do football references here. Good. So it's like, so it's kind of like this. It's like, imagine that like you play a sport, right? You learn how to play some sport, and you're always playing you're always playing that sport. And then one day you invent your own sport that you're the best of the world in. You're going to want to play that sport all the time instead of the other sport. And so like what I have tried to do is like figure out what I am good at uniquely and then focus on those things rather than try to do other things in other people's worlds, trying to fit into their world. And so that's the basis of how I think about what I want to do in the future, is like this is kind of the basis of positive psychology, is like taking the good in people and then emphasizing that as the route to success. And it sounds quite obvious, like, okay, figure out what you're good at and do it. Well, most people just don't know. And I'm sure, and I had this really interesting experience last month. I went to this workshop. I've gone to all these workshops recently. Just because I don't know why. It was at Harvard Business School, and it was about figuring out, like, renewing yourself, figuring out what you want to do. And I've done a lot of this work, right? And so you had to list like everything you're good at. And I was writing it all down, and I was like, can I have some more paper, please? Like and I was like at like 25 things. And then I looked over across the table at a person who was my colleague in business school, my year in business school, and this person had written one thing, despite having a really, awesome career. And I turned to the person and I was like, give me your paper. I'll write down things. Like, but people don't think that way. So I think, that realization for many of us is like, what do I actually want to do? What am I good at, kind of stuff, which is sound basic, is actually really hard to get to. It takes time. And now that I've kind of figured it out, that's what I want to do. I like really doing three things. Well, probably four things. I like doing four things. One is media stuff. So, I write books, I have podcasts, I speak. I like doing that. I want to just do more of that, bigger more of that. I love it. New ideas all the time. Number two, I like investing. Number three, I've started a coaching company, and I like that because my favorite part of being a VC was the day after we closed the investment. I was always like, I don't care about this beginning. Like, let's do the deal and then let's make the company successful. And then fourth is I'm very passionate about, sort of, I hate to say politics isn't the word I want to use, but like things in society. I got quite involved in politics, a couple of other things. Using my brain, not my money. Like in America, all these people give tons of money to politics, but nobody gives ideas. I'd rather give ideas than money because ideas are the ones that are intangible. So that's kind of, but if you really step back, I've just given you a lot of information. What I really care about doing is taking my ideas and putting them into the world to get things done in interesting and unpredictable ways.
So you're very good at media because you answered exactly what you wanted to answer, but you didn't respond to what your dream was.
Which was what?
What are your dreams?
My dreams.
You know, in media, how everyone's like, yeah, that's a great question. Let me just tell you exactly what I want to say.
It's true. That's what politicians do too.
Yeah.
My dreams. Okay, that's good. That's fair. I agree. I did not answer it. My dreams are, I would like to have an apartment in Argentina. I'd like to have something in Spain. I know. I want real estate. I would like to write a couple more books. I'd like to be the kind of person that when I have an idea about something going on in society, I can get it published in the New York Times. I'd like to have one kid, maybe more, but at least one. That's really it. Those are the things I would focus on. I feel like a lot of my other things I've done already. You know what I mean? I've been pretty good about going after what I want.
So what's next with that list?
What's the first thing I'm going to tackle?
Yeah.
Probably the
Because I
real
mean,
estate.
let's be honest. Real estate is easy.
Probably top of mind right now would be family, starting a family. If I can, do that. That feels like something that you need to sort of focus on. You can't do that at 73. Some of the other things are like things that just take time. Having the New York Times want to publish you, you just have to build up to that. Yeah.
So let's think 10 years from now. Patrick has a little son or a little daughter. What do you think that would mean for Patrick?
Probably, well, based on my brother who has a 5-year-old daughter, I think it means you redesign your life, conscious around, somebody else. You put somebody else at the center of your priorities. I think that is a big shift that people make, and I would make as well. Yeah.
What do you think would change to get there?
Well, I think it's interesting. I've made a lot of changes the last couple of years. Like, you can't just travel whenever you want. So, I mean, you can take a child with you, but you don't want a kid like on a plane also. So it's things like about creating a more stable daily environment. That would be the biggest change, I think. But I think it's a change that like I've already sort of implemented or is trying to implement, just because I also think it's like something that I wanted for myself.
What is it that you think would bring you to be a father?
What do you mean?
Yeah, what would bring into your life? What do you think
what would it bring in? Okay,
you'd be after?
I think it's interesting. After, I don't think it was after so much as I do think it's a great learning and life experience. Like it is part of the cycle of life. And so, and it also, I think for many of us that are type A overachievers, it's willingness to give in to uncertainty. Like all of a sudden you can't control things in the way that you think you can, right? When we really all can't control anything. I mean, we all have to accept the fact that you could be walking down the street and an air conditioner falls out a window and hits you in the head and you're gone. I mean, I always think about that. But especially when you have, a child or anybody who's dependent upon you, your sense of control and what that is, you have to radically change the way you think about it.
Do you always think of what would life be if that does not
Yeah, except either way. I mean, I think it's definitely, I know what life looks like having not had a child yet, right? So I'm in touch with what that is.
Yeah. I think, I mean, probably the reason I even asked this is because, I'm probably also asking myself the same question when it comes to fatherhood, right? And one of the things that typically come, and I can sort of say, I don't know if this is FOMO related. At some point, of course, fatherhood becomes almost an element of like, am I missing out on something?
Yes.
Will I be okay if I leave this planet without having experienced that? Even the question of what's going to happen with me when I'm older, if I'm all alone and having no children to somehow be closer to me. Will I want to die alone? Do we come alone and do we die alone? Or how does this even work, right? Are these questions that have sort of passed on your mind as well?
Absolutely. First of all, I think about so you don't know what your relationship would be with your child. You may have a kid and do everything right, and that kid hates your guts.
Hates you.
And so they won't even visit you, even if you fall down the stairs and break your leg. So you just, that is the reality of the situation, right? You also may die alone. You may be a father of 12 with 3 wives in a harem, but you're riding your bike in the desert and you crash it and you die in a ditch. That is the way life works. But what I've learned about that, at least with dying alone, having done a lot of thinking about this and work around this, is this is my belief, and now you're getting me, Juan, into the woo-woo space that I'm very happy to go to, which is when you're born, you're not alone. When you're inside your mom, you're not alone, because you always have your subconscious, your essence. When you're quiet in a room, all alone in your apartment, you have the inside bits of you that are there. And if you're aligned or you work to align yourself to them, they're there. You know what I mean? You can be your own best friend. And when you're dying in a ditch, you aren't alone, because the inside part, the soul, whatever you want to call it, is there. And I think that if you can figure that out, it makes life a lot less scary. You know what I mean? And you can figure that in a bunch of ways. There's lots of ways to go to those places, whether it's meditation for some people, whether it's religion for others, whether it's psilocybin for others, all that stuff. But it happens to be that there's human wisdom that people come to that generally oftentimes leads to those kinds of places. I don't know. What do you think?
I haven't figured it out yet. I think it's a question that's still always there. I think it's a question that we sort of want to somehow also respond with a layer of faith and that layer of spirituality of saying there's got to be something else. There's got to be something bigger. I feel at times that there's also a connection that we have with every single part of what's in this universe.
Yeah.
And so potentially from that perspective, we're already not alone, never, ever. But there are some times that I think that we are alone. And so I think it's sort of living within these 2 elements of we're all connected, we're all alone, we're all connected, we're all alone, and trying to balance that out so that we don't lose our minds over it. I think that's kind of where most days I find a bit of peace, I'd say.
What's interesting though? If you go with me here, let me just put a thought experiment out, which is that so I've just told you my theory of the case, which is I truly believe, and it's when I meditate, or I love hypnotherapy. So I've done hypnotherapy 12 times or something. I think it's the greatest thing ever. Super powerful stuff. When I'm in a meditative state or a hypnotherapy, more when hypnotherapy, meditation, you got to go pretty deep. I can feel it. I can see my subconscious. I'm like, there you are. Hi, how are you? And so I believe it now. It's something that I just accept as reality, the way that the sky is blue. It's just, okay. And so therefore, I kind of also believe that no matter what happens, that'll be my framework. Even if tomorrow you tell me, no, that's all bullshit, Patrick. I'll be like, yeah, whatever, dude. That's for you. So I kind of solve that for myself. And I don't know if I could ever go back to a place where I feel like I don't have that. You know what I mean? I guess as an article of faith at some point, but like you also sort of see the proof and you're like, okay, that's just how our bodies work. That's how our minds work. Here we are.
Yeah. I'm with you. The only one thing that sort of somehow to me almost invites me to sort of think of what comes first, sort of the chicken and egg, is do we believe in it and then we see it, and then once we see it, we cannot stop believing in it? Or do we, is it something that we just stumbled upon and suddenly we're like, oh, I believe in this because I just saw it? That's kind of,
But I
that's
don't
the
think
part.
it matters. That's the point.
No, probably doesn't.
Like
Probably
once
doesn't.
it's there, it's there.
Yeah. But that's probably the same thing as everything that has to do with how do we build a narrative to our, of anything in life.
Yeah.
Right? Like we build that story once we see it, once we believe it, we just make it true. It doesn't even matter if it's true or not. If it's true to ourselves, we already pick it up as truth. And so I think it's about how we can sort of, we have this power to create, to destroy, especially within ourselves, pretty much everything.
Yes.
Have you, I mean, you seem to have a lot of spiritual work, under your belt. How close are you to your fears?
That's a great question. It's interesting. Spiritual work. I like the use of that term. I think I think the answer to that question is that I was forced, like in 2008, I referenced this period where I sort of think about my life in these phases. I had this phase, which was like the pre-2008 kind of time when I was working in corporate America. I had done I was doing very much the conventional thing that I thought I was supposed to do. I was happy, I guess. I don't know. I mean, what is happiness? But I was kind of like, I don't think I was in a particularly great space. And then it all blew up in spectacular fashion. My company went bankrupt. My stock went to zero. I ended up on a heart monitor due to stress. I had this really weird illness that was kind of like long COVID before we had long COVID. Everything went to crap, really bad. And I just felt so sad and alone and depressed, and it was awful. And then I kind of had to pull myself out of that. And I think, it's like, the term rock bottom is so like, I don't know what that, it's not like, people, we all have phases of life. Everybody goes through bad things, right? And most people survive those things and are quite resilient. That's just the nature of being a human. But having had that, at the age of, I think I was 32, yeah. It was a real education. And so I think it made me far less fearful and far more willing to talk about things that I'm afraid of than I was before, and far more willing to see control than I was before, because I had no control. And it definitely set me on this path. Like before all that happened, I would have never considered the things that we were talking about right now. I would have thought it was weird. After I became much more interested in them. So yeah, I think I'm in reasonably good in touch with my fears. I mean, I certainly know what they are. I wake up in the middle of the night and have some, right?
What is that?
We all do. What do I worry about? I think like I'm oriented towards having a lot of security. I grew up in a very stable environment, and but in very middle class, totally had everything we needed. But I really wanted like a lot of financial stability and life stability. That's why I went to these big corporations, and then it all failed and blew up on me. And I chose a more entrepreneurial path, which I'm glad I have done. But I think the unpredictability of working for yourself that's very hard. And so sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and be like, what happens if blah, blah, blah? I catastrophize. I'm going to end up living in a cardboard box on the side of the road, And I think that is why entrepreneurship is so hard on people.
And what do you tell yourself to get back to sleep? Or do you even go back to sleep?
No, I do. First of all, everybody should own an eye shade and a weighted blanket, because that'll just bring down your parasympathetic nervous system. So that's number one. Number two is I tend to, I've actively worked to design my life in a way to address some of those concerns. And so I just remember to myself, these are the things that you were trying to solve for. Here's what you're doing. So just like get up tomorrow and do the things.
I hear we live in a world where do the things, right? Do becomes almost a recipe for let's not stop, let's not look at what's really true, but rather let's just keep on moving. It almost feels like when you're like I get this image of like a dog in the water, just like. Do you ever stop?
Yeah, I do. I have 2 speeds, 0 and 100. So I tend to go at 100 and then I'll do 0 for a while. I definitely stop. But I also tend to be a person who's very optimistic, and I'm always dreaming up the next thing. Like I love ideas, and I'll get really excited about something and want to like learn about it and write about it and share it with the world. And so I'm an ideas-driven person, and that all happens inside my head. And so that does tend to be when I hit 100.
It definitely feels like optimism is a value that you bring out very clearly. In general, it's the energy that you bring, the words that you choose. Just like, is this something that you think was always there? Is it somehow something that you've built? Is this something that also could be a facade to some? Well, what's the real Patrick?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Fernando Fabre?
Yeah.
He just wrote me an email and saying that he's like, you've always been when I think of optimism, I think of you, which I thought was really interesting, because I don't necessarily think that I'm exuding optimism. It's my framework for the world, and it's not a bullshit thing. Actually, I will tell you, it's real. I think it's because as a kid, so I was always an optimistic child. Like I was always like, I think part of it was my parents were very careful about raising me to believe I could, do anything, which I know is so American. Sorry, everybody, it's so American, but not in a way that was like crappy and stupid. Like they wouldn't be like, Patrick, you can be in the NBA even though you're going to be 5'7". Like they weren't unrealistic, but they were like, if you work hard and set goals, you could do some of these things. So they were always very encouraging. Like when we got an idea, when I was interested in the history of American Revolution, we just got in the car and drove to Boston and saw all the things, right? So they were always encouraging me to learn and be kind of growth mindset, I guess, like without the terminology. And then when I was in 5th grade, so roughly, 11, 12 years old or something, I had the onset of a thing called Tourette syndrome, which is like a thing where you have different physical and tics where you move and shake. And I was definitely, it was pretty traumatic, and kids were very mean to me, and I was made fun of. And I just had to learn to dig within myself to be able to like deal with that, and to be able to like, and I was very good at like compartmentalizing, like, okay, well, I'm just gonna put that over here, I'm gonna focus over here. And so I was always like, what can I do today to make this day matter? And how do I overcome this challenge by succeeding over here? And I think that gave me this well of optimism, because I was forced every day to decide how I was gonna live that day, even though I had this challenge. And I did. And so as a result, I've generally gone back to optimism. I'm also a curious person. I think curiosity and optimism go together. Because when you're curious about the world, then you're excited to learn what's in it. And you assume that there's something good behind behind the hood. So yeah, it is real. It's not like I'm Pollyanna. Like, I understand bad things happen. I'm not always happy, but generally I tend to just gravitate towards the optimistic side of things.
What's something you're very optimistic about right now?
Oh, that's a good question, because it's hard right now, right? So in terms of the global, well, I'll tell you, like, it's like, I'm really excited. I guess excited is different, but I'm like, ooh, the Olympics are coming up. I'm like, that'll be amazing. I'm optimistic about that experience. It'll be really fun and exciting. In terms of I think, despite all of the sort of really tough stuff happening in the world, politically, ecologically, like all of these sort of dire existential things. One thing that gives me optimism is I work a lot on some of the, especially politics these days, is the amount of really good people that have dedicated their time and energy to trying to find solutions. It feels like, in a way, even though democracy in some ways is like really endangered, it feels like almost like we have a more democratic society because so many more people can actually like do something about it. It's weird. I feel optimistic about that because I think what tends to happen to people is when you see a problem and you can do nothing about that problem, you just get upset and depressed. If you actually can do something, even if it's small, if you feel like you're part of doing something about it, it feels a lot less, I don't know, it feels, you shift it into a different place, a zone of opportunity versus a zone of fear. Yeah, like I feel like you just feel like there's more, when a problem happens now, like you can marshal way more resources like across the world, like with technology, I don't know, it's interesting. I've been very involved in some stuff, like I said, in US politics, and like you just set up a Zoom and you get like all these smart people in a room together virtually to come and you start brainstorming what you can do about it. You leverage your networks. It's just like way more democratized in some ways. Now, granted, I say that with the caveat that I'm coming from a place where I'm, connected to a bunch of people who in some ways or another have influence, right? So would I feel that way if I were living in a village that was affected by climate change in Africa? Probably not. So like, I totally get that might sound very out of touch. But for me, where I sit, as I think about optimism, then yeah, that's where I come at.
Do you journal?
I do not journal.
But you meditate.
I probably should journal, but I don't.
Why should you?
Everybody says, well, doesn't the science tell us that journaling is really good for emotional and mental fitness? So the
science tells that there's tons of things that we should be doing, but most of the times we don't.
I have my own informal version of journaling, which is kind of funny, is that I write down lots of little notes all over the place for myself in different places. That's kind of my equivalent. But I don't actually, and I write books and things like that. So in essence, although I don't journal every day, I collect my ideas and I send like I write articles. So yeah, in a sense, like I do Instagram stories, which is like a form of journalism. So I guess I do actually, in one way or another, I have my own version of that.
Yeah. In all this writing that you do, how can you make the distinction between what's really truly authentic versus what you're trying to convey as in a way, a product?
Yeah. That is such a good question. And by the way, this is something you learn when you write a book. And if you don't learn it, then your book is going to suck. Because when I wrote the first book, and granted, like my work has like some branding around it. I invent words and I use the word. So like there is some like framework. You have to have like structure, right?
And you're really good at it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I remember writing my first book and, you send in the draft and, chapter 3, you tell this hilarious story about something or other that you've just always wanted to write. You're like, when I write a book someday, I'm going to use that story. That's so amazing. And then your editor, because editors, they're magical people if they're good, says, why did you put that story in chapter 3 about your friend and you getting lost in a village in Uganda? And you're like, because that story is fucking amazing. And then they'll say, you wrote that story for you. That story was all about you and wanting to tell that story to somebody and be cool. It's not about your reader. Your reader isn't getting anything out of that story. It's not serving your reader. And so the litmus test for creating content, and you have to be self-aware, obviously, is the content in service of the reader, or is the content in service of your ego? And a good editor will help you to figure that out. But like, I was working on an op-ed the other day for something, and I pitched it, and my friends were like, are you excited? Do you think you're gonna be able to write it? And I said, well, I don't care either way. Like, if they want me to write it, it's because they think that it makes sense and then it'll be good. If they don't think it makes sense, then I don't care, because like, then it means the piece isn't valuable. I don't have to do it for my ego. I'm doing this because I want this idea in the world, because I think it could be of value. So that's how I think about it. And it takes time to learn that. And that's why when you read a business book that sucks, it's usually because they haven't figured that out.
And you went to Harvard, and I didn't, so maybe I'm a little bit slow on this. But shouldn't then the book be written for you, in a way? Like, what I hear is there's a difference between writing something that you want first in service of someone else, right? So in a way, there's not me there, versus this is something I want to write and I want to have it there. And it feels like those are two different things.
That is a fair point. If you're
then you kind of put them together, yeah, because that's
Yeah,
for sure what you've done is not journaling then. But
yeah. I'm talking about if you're writing a book or if you're writing something you want to put out there in the public,
yeah,
then you have to sit back and think, who will be reading this and how do I serve them? Or how does this content serve them? If you're writing something for yourself, I mean, why would anybody write something inauthentic to themselves?
no, but that's I guess my original question coming into like, how do you separate the fact that you're writing a product that should serve others?
Yeah.
How do you make the difference between that and just doing something that feels authentic and that's you?
Yeah, I think with the product, as in a sense of product, a great product always is designed around its customer and the need of the customer. And so that has to be your true north. And it will be different, because if there's ego in it, and you see this in books all the time, there's like, if you have to, as much as possible, without, you have to be yourself and show yourself and be true to yourself and be authentic in terms of like your tone and the things you talk about. If I just wrote about things that, like my life experiences are my life experiences, but if I use them in some story about something, oh, I met the Pope, whatever, which I didn't, but I'd love to. But if that story is just there to tell you I met the Pope to show off, bad. If it's there because the Pope said something that is really valuable to the reader, it's okay. That kind of stuff.
Did you ever consider writing fiction?
Oh man, I've tried. It's bad. Have you? Fiction's impossible.
I've played with it.
Oh.
It's the most therapeutical thing I've ever done.
Really?
I'd say, yeah. When I started writing a story that I still have it somewhere, about the characters that in my mind were the furthest apart for who I could be, just so that I wouldn't try to make it me. So I was writing the story about an 80-year-old woman befriending a 10-year-old girl and their relationship. And there's no way to escape you in this process. You end up writing, and then you look and you're like, oh, that's what I just wrote. And you realize there's always you coming out. Yeah. It's super interesting. And I guess that in a way, when you were telling me about this, I guess that's where the big difference of when you're writing, say, a business book. you have to make a product. You have to somehow be catering to someone and someone's needs and a goal, and a particular goal, and everything has to go through the lens of, is this serving that particular goal, of serving that goal that my customer has, my reader has. I guess with fiction, what it does is it liberates this need, because there's no need to go anywhere.
Yeah, you know what's hard about fiction? So I wrote half of a book, a fiction book. And what I realized, first of all, and this is my own personal, maybe a fiction writer would tell me I'm wrong, but you need to do a lot more planning. When you're inventing a world and a storyline, you really have to think carefully about creating a story that holds together with like all the little breadcrumbs you set up, so that later on things like align, and like, oh, they dug up the body in chapter 11. Well, it has to be buried in chapter 2, like that kind of stuff. And I just can't. I'm not structured that way. So like, I remember I wrote half a book, and then in chapter 7 I was like, oh crap, like none of the timelines work out, like none of it makes sense anymore, and I gave up.
Were you also telling yourself like, I'm not good for this? Like, I'm picking up this, like, because I can't do this, right? Like,
I thought it was pretty good, but the problem was I was writing a book about me, essentially. It was like a book about me and my friends, which is like a lot of what fiction is, right? Like writing a book about something that's totally not you, that's masterpiece. That's incredible.
But it's impossible. I think I'm ready to sort of challenge pretty much anyone who would be able to say there's nothing from themselves in their writing. It's impossible. And what I've heard is that you basically have two ways of doing this. You either plan it everything ahead of time, right? Or you do the complete opposite, and you just write, and then you figure it out later. And I think there are successful ways of getting there through each of the potential sides. But I think probably the biggest hurdle in the process is, how do we learn to live with what we just created without judging it from a very harsh side of, I don't know if this is something you've gone through when you were writing, but like, I feel that it's painful to reread what I write.
No, I feel really comfortable, actually. This has always been like, I'm very meticulous, right? Like I know what I want to sound. I would never work with a ghostwriter. Like when people tell me that, I'm just like, you do you. That's not something I would do. I feel like the writing is inside of me, and it just comes out, to be honest with you, when I write nonfiction anyway. Like, it's like the book is already written. I just need to sit down and do it. And in fact, I found that when I write something, I'll go back to notes from a year before, and it'll be almost identically the same. Like, it's like I wrote it, forgot I had it, and then I'll see. So it's inside of me, yeah? And so when I read my stuff, it feels so natural to me. It's like, and I find my writing really, I like my writing. So I am always like, wow, this is so good, Patrick. Good job. With fiction, it just felt lazy to me. I was like, oh, you're just basically using your life stories and also correcting and settling old scores. And it was very much in service of me, I think. It was more like a therapy sesh.
Yeah. But was that really fiction?
It was-ish. I mean, it would be interesting to write like a short story, maybe as a way to sort of reconnect and see if that's something you know what I mean? That's a good idea, actually. Maybe I'll do that.
Are you going to share it with us?
Why not? I love sharing. My writing, when I pitched, like even the other day, I pitched an article. Even before the pitch was done, I'd send it to like 5 friends. Like, isn't this a great idea? What do you think of this? Like, I love getting feedback. I'm very comfortable with getting feedback on stuff that I do. And I always think it's very clever.
What's one question that you sort of ask yourself from time to time that helps you sort of stay on your path?
Oh. That's a great question. I'm trying to think about, and this is a lot. So you use a specific term that I want to hone in on here, which is stay on your path. What my big risk is that I get easily distracted by, like, I get a lot of inbound from a million different people for all kinds of random things. It could be just asking for advice, which I love giving advice, but I can't give advice to 500 people a year, right? It could be offering me to go somewhere. Oh, you want to go? We'll fly you out to like XYZ city to do this thing, whatever. Always exciting, right? I'm like, ooh, that could be fun. Wow, what's going to happen there, right? And I think over time, you start to realize when you look at your calendar and you're like, oh, why did I say I was going to go to this place? Like, Jesus, it's a week out of my life. Now I'm going to like Asia for this. Like, why did I do this, right? And so that regret is something that I hate that feeling. When I look at my calendar, I'm like, why am I giving advice to 7 people today when I have so much work to do? Why did I agree to this, right? It's all things I agreed to. And those things take me off my path, which is the things that I want to be doing. And so it's so much what I've learned to do, and this is new, is to stop. I ask myself, in a month or in a week, whenever I'm going to, like, even if I wait 24 hours, like, will I still want to do this thing? And the vast majority of times when I actually stop, I realize no, and then I say no.
Mm.
Yeah.
Interesting. And is there a way to, because I feel that that's sort of, there's a big regret element there. Like it just feels like if it's going to be no, it's going to be super heavy. Do you have one that kind of goes to the other element of like, hell yeah, like this is the coolest thing? Do you have a north of, let's say, the things that you're very clear that are the most important things for you?
The thing about the irony of all this, I actually have it in front of me here. I don't know if you can see this. I made this.
FOMO, opportunity, status quo, yes, no.
If the present value of the opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, I made this and I keep it next to me because it was very liberating. I came up with it 2 years ago or something. So here's the thing, Juan. This is the irony. They all kind of feel exciting and equally exciting. It's like trip to Europe and dinner with this person. When at the moment you get the invite or you get the thing, they both feel kind of the same, which is weird. But it isn't, and I think the reality is that decisions, like think about it the flip side. People will get as stressed out about deciding which hotel they're staying at as deciding like, you know, something way more important. Or they'll spend hours deciding like which restaurant to eat at. We tend to, even when things aren't that important, we conflate them. And that's, you know, it's an interesting quirk in our brains. And so therefore, I found that if I take a little time, then I start to have a better sense of what matters and what doesn't, and what actually ties into my goals and values. And that's the big unlock for me, is just not reacting. Because yeah, people are like, it happened to me the other day. I met some people and they're like, we should get together for coffee. I'm like, great, that'd be amazing. And then they email me and I'm like, why did I agree to this? Right? I'm sure they're great, but I'm like, I have other shit to do. And so that's what I've learned. I get very excited.
Is that growing up?
Definitely. Definitely growing up. But I also think I don't want to lose that. You know, I love the fact that I get excited about stuff, you know? I mean, most people don't. So I'll keep that.
Yeah. I think we also don't necessarily always remember how precious time is. But not from a perspective of productivity, right? Because I think everything right now is sort of geared more towards the element of like, what can I do with my time? And there's something of like of an efficiency element to it. But I think there's also an element of the fact that this second will never come back.
Yes.
If you want to sort of even go back to the spiritual plane of the ticking clock.
Yeah.
All
It's
right.
the trade-off. Yeah, for sure.
So if I ask you what one at a time means to you, what would you relate it to?
One at a time. It's interesting, especially given the context of everything we talked about. I would say, based on our conversation, grounding it back into this, it's taking the time to consider things, at least for a moment, one thing at a time, and trying to separate the elements. Because I think what happens in modern day living, and probably it always happened, but definitely today, is that we have so many stimuli coming at us at once that we get confused about what we're feeling and connecting it. It's like, these 5 things happen, I have these feelings, I don't know what is causing what thing. And so one at a time is to try to slow down, disaggregate. And I do this a lot, actually. Like, I'll be like, I feel this, say I feel unwell, uneasy. I'll stop and be like, what? Okay, let me think about what's causing that right now. And then I'll try to figure it out and then actually go and attack that thing. Deal with that thing. So that's what one at a time means.
Great. Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time of your agenda for today. I hope you don't regret it in a month.
No, I didn't. This one I didn't.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say or bring up before we call it a day?
No, I think we said it all. You got me to say, not get me to it. We've had a conversation where of many things I haven't talked about in the past. So I hope folks enjoy that. And I think you do a really good job of asking questions that encourage people to not give the old usual response. So well done, you.
Thank you.